We're here with Grand Tactician Civil War and starting a new campaign. I just recently finished up a Union campaign not too long ago, so I thought I would do another one from the other side. So we will do a Confederate campaign here. And I will mention I've played this game a good bit and have played several campaigns, and they've all been Union. This is my first time playing CSA, so let's see if I can avoid mucking it up. And before I actually go into the start, just show me options, because I won't be able to show it again once I go into the campaign setup screen. Just what I'm doing for options. The historical fonts are really hard to read. I always have that turned off. I think it's off by default. I thought about deactivating the newspaper, but I kind of like the newspaper headlines that pop up. A lot of them are, of course, you get one for all the policies, but you also get a lot of historical flavor stuff, including European events, like stuff going on in Germany and stuff, and things like that. Got the music all the way down to off, so it's not audible, because I don't know if there's any copyright issues with that that would cause problems with the videos on YouTube. They may be okay, I just don't know. Got the chapter videos deactivated, because when those pop up, they last for quite a while. Do have European intervention turned on. I don't know if I'll particularly pursue that with policies, but it is turned on, as it is by default. Kind of the biggest one, and the main reason I'm even showing this, is I do have Commander Initiative on by default, and once I start the campaign, I will not be able to change that. So my AI subordinate generals will be predisposed to run amok if they so desire. And by default, continuous VP from objectives is always on. I've always played with that on. And I'm going to turn it off just because, just to see how big a difference, if any, that makes. I don't know. I mean, just reading the tooltip, accumulate VP over time, may allow small armies to hold their own battles against larger foes. Typically, as far as I've seen, the victory points from objectives play a pretty minor part in determining battle outcomes. I just see the objective points as kind of the starting point for understanding what the AI is likely to do. That's what I think the significance of the objectives are. You know, I've won plenty of battles without ever holding an objective. Anyway, so I'm going to turn it off just to see if I really see any difference in the AI behavior. I don't really expect to, but yeah, whatever. And then, anyway, so that's what I'm doing for options. I'll do a CSA campaign, summer 1861. I know a lot of people start in the spring 1861 in online campaigns that they post. It just seems to me that's just several months of just fiddling with policies and recruiting troops and things like that. And we'll see some action a little quicker if we just start in the summer. Okay, going Confederate. Yeah, okay. You got to click the flag, not the portrait. We'll just go. I'm just going to go kind of middle of the road, mediocre, mediocre. You know, I don't want to put it. If I put it all the way upward very hard, that's just going to make the Union national morale that much higher and just drag out a little bit longer campaign. I don't want to do a 100-episode campaign. But I don't want it to be just super easy. So I'm just going to kind of go middle of the road here. And we'll go hard. Yeah, we'll go hard. But I'm going to keep aggressiveness on mediocre, because I kind of feel like if I go way high on aggressiveness, there will be some irritating things, playing whack-a-mole with armies slipping around and running down into the south. But at the same time, I also feel like that may make the AI just kind of go suicide itself and butting heads into me when they really shouldn't. Medecker seems... I'm just going to keep it there. Okay, just staying with the historic Union policies. Yeah, let's go. Let's let them go random. Just see what they pick. And then for for the Confederacy, I'm not. I'll put it back on random in a second. But the default that the game typically starts you on are Old Dominion, King Cotton, Native Allies, and I don't want to go that route. In summer 1861, the main thing about Old Dominion is you start with Virginia, already a Confederate state, and the capital is moved from Montgomery to Richmond. And in the summer 1861 start, you start with Virginia already in the Confederacy anyway, and with pretty high support, so this kind of seems not all that beneficial. King Cotton, I'll probably go with that. European intervention, plus 20. Supporting all slave states, not just Confederate, but the 4 non-seceded slave states as well, plus 5. And I like going for a little bit of agriculture. I mainly because provisions are such a big deal in supply. So I'm going to keep King Cotton. I don't know about the Native Americans, the Alliance, because what it does is it increases support in Indian territory and allows recruitment from the tribes there. It's not a very high population area, and it's not all that critical a theater of war. So it's not useless, but I want to go a little bit different route. Okay, now I'll put it back on random. And it kind of gave me most of what I wanted. I'm going to keep the King Cotton, and I'm going to go for Southern industrialization, and I'm pretty tempted by the Southern Pacific Railroad as well, with the credit rating boost, the rail transport capacity, and construction speed up. I like the sound of this, and I think in maybe a future campaign I may try this out, but I want to go with arms agents. Weapons available increased by 50%, and Springfield weapon types, the Springfield rifle muskets primarily, become available for production in the South's industry, and Union morale -5. Kind of the way I play this game, the way I think most people play this game, playstyle wise, is the king in this game is infantry firepower. Artillery and cavalry are very useful. They have their place. But battle outcomes are primarily determined by the relative casualties on both sides. I'm not saying anything that anyone watching this video probably doesn't already know. And frankly, the big killer in among the units in this game are infantry. So I want to do what I can within reason to ensure that we have sufficient rifles available to our troops earlier in the war than later. And that's kind of the idea behind choosing industrialization, kind of going that way. So rather than an asymmetric approach, I'm kind of making an attempt here to fight fire with fire versus the Union strengths, which I will not match, I don't think, but will do well enough with artillery. And it's not just the infantry small arms, but this should help with artillery production too. So that's why I'm going with those three starting policies. And then for the realism options, I've just got them all clicked on. The order delays, the readiness, the fog of war, which I usually do anyway. Except for I'm 50-50 on the feuds. I mean, they're irritating when they occur. However, I have read a number of opinions online, and people think that feuds actually hurt the AI more than it does the player. So I considered leaving this off, but I'm going to just go ahead and play with everything on, and also the initiative in the options. With that, let's get rolling. Okay. Macro view here, the front line situation of where we're starting with territory controlled. Notably, Kentucky is not a Confederate state. However, we hold a fair amount of it over here in the east. And I think that's because the largest big city to this eastern Kentucky area are Charleston, Virginia, not West Virginia, but it's still part of Virginia at this point, up here, and then Knoxville over here in eastern Tennessee. So a lot of these small towns and industries over here in eastern Kentucky are under the sphere of influence, I guess would be a good word for it, of Confederate-held cities as opposed to towns. By the same token, the Union does already have control of a pretty big chunk of Virginia up here. We'll see what we can do about that as the campaign progresses. Kind of a look at the starting situation. The Union does start with higher national morale than we do, and I think that's partly because of the hard difficulty setting, but also because we did not take well, I don't remember if morale was part of the that may have been part of the Old Dominion that I didn't take. We do have higher national support. Army morale is starting off quite high on both sides. I'm a little bit surprised that the Union starts with 100 though. I know when I started this Union, I didn't ever get 100. Number of states, about 70,000 to 50,000 for men currently in uniform. Obviously, the Union has got a way, way bigger Navy. And it's not just sheer tonnage, but also, you know, they've got frigates. Whereas we've got a bunch of little tramp steamers. And that's unlikely to change much overall. About the same on military experience. The game does start with a couple of, or the campaign here does start where there's already been a few very small battles here and there, 3 and 3 for both sides, with very minor casualties in those few battles. We've got the 40 European relations. That's pretty standard. No chance yet for trade warfare to have done anything yet. And weapons industry for both sides is pretty bad, but it is better for the Union, and that's probably not going to change. And overall, the game says we are evenly matched. Our tasks, which aren't mandatory, well, the top one is, but they aren't mandatory, but some objectives that we get benefits from. Breaking Union national morale. We need to get them from 95 down to 25. When the Northern public gets to 25 national morale, they give up. A big chunk of that is capturing the capital, and that's a big minus 20 morale hit. That's definitely something we want to do if we can. Win a major battle. That will come pretty early, I think. I certainly hope it does. Union support below 60 by November 1862. That strikes me as a pretty tall order to get overall support below 60 that early. I mean, if we just were able to just run roughshod all through northern states and capture a bunch of cities, we could. Getting a particular state below 60 shouldn't be that difficult. But overall, with as high support as the Union starts, particularly up around New York and New England, I don't know if that's going to happen. If it were, though, this would be almost as good as a win, because if you are able to do this, if Union support is below 60 by that date, Democrats take control of Congress and will cause Union national morale to decrease steadily. I just don't know if that's going to happen. Capture 3 cities, 3 northern cities. Win in Union territory. These are a little bit ambiguous to me because Missouri and Kentucky in particular, but I guess this also applies to Maryland and Delaware, they are not seceded, but they are slave states. And there's quite a bit of Confederate support in Missouri and Kentucky, not so much in Maryland and Delaware, although there is some. But for purposes of capture 3 cities and states loyal to the Union, I think because they're not seceded, Kentucky and Missouri count for that, but I'm not 100% sure they do. We might have to capture 3 cities in like Illinois or Indiana or something. But I would think that cities like Louisville and St. Louis should count for that, I would think. As I said, I haven't played the Confederacy before. And then the same thing with win in Union territory. Major Union defeat on their own territory will demoralize the northern citizens. Whether Kentucky and Missouri count for that, not 100% sure. I would think it does. But if these 2 objectives apply in Kentucky and Missouri, then pursuing these also necessarily lines up with these 2 objectives of capturing Kentucky and Missouri, which will be huge because then they will flip and secede. And it'll hurt Union national morale, which is the primary objective for the campaign. CSA support increases. And the biggest thing is that should open up significantly more manpower for our armies in those states. and that's always going to be a concern. 5 consecutive land battles. I think this will probably happen as a matter of course, just as the campaign progresses, helping our national morale. Winning 5 consecutive naval battles, though. Yeah, I don't know if that's going to happen. And whether it does or not, I mean, a 2.5 national morale boost on our side, that would be nice. I don't know if that's worth really pursuing and pouring tons of resources into the naval war for the CSA. Finances. Kind of the way that the state of the game is economy-wise. There's really no reason not to just max out all the sliders and leave it alone. Because even as you add more policies and the level of subsidies adds up, and it may get up to around, I don't know, 4 or 5, maybe even 6 million when all this, later in the campaign after policies are unlocked. But if you look at the expenses, and we're spending 17 million just on having a government, not even the war side, just, post offices, government clerks, washing the windows on the Capitol building in Richmond, crap like that. Even here at the very beginning with the small military we have, we're already spending 12 million on the Army. And the biggest expense will probably wind up being supply depots. Time hasn't started running yet, so it's 0 for the moment, but it won't stay that way. The subsidies really just aren't that huge a percentage of the economy. So, put them on very high, leave them there. Policies. I'm going to start off with Militia Act 2. Definitely, because before I start recruiting a lot of units, I want to make sure that the soldiers I'm recruiting are 2-year enlistments, not 1 year. Otherwise, I go and recruit a bunch of units and a whole bunch of them go home in the middle of next summer. And that would not be good. So Militia Act 2 to start off with. Other policies that I want to do early are not necessarily in order, but going to want that 3-year enlistment pretty quickly. And it's not just for the length of the enlistments, but it also increases the recruitment quotas. So it increases the manpower, the volunteers' manpower as well. All of these militia acts do that. Definitely are going to want military too. Helps recruitment, helps civil order and trade warfare subsidies, and it allows the establishment of the Army and Corps structure, which is pretty key. So we definitely want this done before heading into the winter of 1861. So game time within the next 3 to 4 months, so that over the winter, when there's not as much going on, we can get the armies properly organized. I don't think I want to do regulars. That strikes me as a penny-wise, pound-foolish effect. The short term, it's good. You get some regular units that are quality as far as training and experience, but you lower the national military experience. So you're always a little bit behind. Whereas right now, it's 13 for the Federals and 14 for us. take that policy and it's like 13 and 9. And even if we win a whole bunch of victories, there is some military experience gained from losses as well. So there's not going to be an enormous gap, even if we're winning a bunch and they are not. Their military experience will still increase. So I don't want to, I don't want to start behind. Definitely going to do at least a couple of the diplomacy policies through the campaign. But Diplomacy 1 in particular, I want to do that early. Between the starting policies that I talked about and Diplomacy 1, that should help us get rifles in the hands of all the infantry fairly quickly. You get Lorenz and Enfield rifles from Diplomacy 1. And they, stat-wise, they're pretty much comparable to the Smithfield rifle muskets, which are the most common among the Union forces, and which we may be able to produce some as well. And then I'm going to want to unlock, since I'm pursuing kind of an industrial effort here in this campaign, I'm going to want to unlock Industrialization 1 fairly early as well. So that's kind of the policy outlook for the near to midterm. And these last two tabs over here, I'm going to show them and probably won't see them again in the campaign. There's a lot under the hood with how the economies and supply systems of this game works, and a tremendous amount of detail. I mean, the game lags a little bit just to even open these tabs. And there's very, very little player interaction with that system. You know, this is an information screen. There's nothing to do here as far as I've ever seen. And, you know, the economy just kind of runs. And there's not much you can do about it either way. I mean, it's not like you can come in here and suss out, well, I'm short on this, and so I'm going to build more of those factories. Nope, that's just not the way it works. There is a patch upcoming, which is supposed to overhaul the economy in this game, but that hasn't happened yet. And kind of the same deal for the trade tab. Same sort of thing. Lots of detail here that the player just can't really do very much with currently. Maybe that will change. That's about all I have. Really, the only way you can affect any of this stuff is back over here on the finance screen with industry, agriculture, transportation, trade, subsidies. And as I already mentioned, there's really no reason not to just put them on very high and leave them there. And that's about, as far as I've ever been able to tell, that's about all there is to being able to interact with and influence the economy in this game, which is to say very, very little. There's just no trade-off management decisions to be made, really. I don't think that was the developer's intent, but it's kind of the way the game is. We'll see what the patch does with the economy when it comes. And I think that's it for the macro national view stuff. Let's take a look at the starting forces. Got 8 independent armies is a rather highfalutin term. Some of these forces are barely division size, if that. but they're scattered across the map. The two biggest armies, of course, are in Northern Virginia. We've got the Army of the Potomac here under Beauregard, and the Army of the Shenandoah under Johnston. And these are really the only forces that are what I would describe combat viable. We've got a little bitty army here in Western Virginia. It's not West Virginia yet, and hopefully things go in such a way that it never becomes West Virginia. A little bitty force here, down close to Hampton. For the longest time, I thought this referred to Hampton's Legion under the command of General Wade Hampton. No, it's called Hampton because it's down here on the peninsula, and there's Hampton, Virginia, which is probably where it first was recruited, I would guess. This is under the command of John Magruder. And then out further west, we got a little starter force here in Nashville under Leonidas Polk. It's less than 2,000 men. Got a little bitty army down here at Pensacola, Army of Florida. That's almost 4,000 men. And then over here in northwestern Arkansas, southwestern Missouri, we got a couple of forces. The Missouri State Guard, 5,000 men, which at this stage of the game for the Confederacy is pretty large. And almost 5,000 under McCulloch. Each of these armies, let's go back and look at the biggest one. None of these armies have any divisions in them. It's just one general with a whole bunch of brigades reporting directly to them, no intermediate commanders. And we have to wait for the Army Corps structure with policies. But we can have, divisions now. And pretty much all of the armies are like this. Army of the Shenandoah the same way. And then the other little armies are so small it's almost not worth having divisions organizationally, although I do think there's still a benefit because of there's a little bit of morale bonus from being close to a commander higher than brigade level. So even if you have just a one brigade division, that is still worth doing because that one brigade will have a little bit of a morale buff from having a division commander nearby. And for some reason, the Missouri State Guard does start with a division under the command of General Rains. But anyway. But in any case, I'm going to do some things off camera here. I'm going to kind of organize the armies as best as I can now. I will probably combine some of them. For example, Hampton Division down here. There are a couple of brigades here at the Fort Monroe garrison, but that's a garrison force. I don't think that the AI is going to do anything with those. So I'll probably just take these brigades in Hampton Division and may send one up to one of these armies up here, but most of these forces, there's only 1,400 men anyway. I'll probably combine most or even all of this with the Army of the Northwest over here in Western Virginia. Not shown on the map now, but there is a fairly sizable force under George McClellan here. I think probably at Grafton, maybe Wheeling. Kind of the same idea here. We've got almost 4,000 troops in this Army of Florida. Fort Pickens is no threat. I don't see any reason to tie up troops down here. So I'm going to take this force, combine it with this little army at Nashville, kind of get this the beginnings of what will eventually be something like the Army of Tennessee. And then I'm going to combine these two armies over here in Arkansas and Missouri. And we'll see, we took that arms agent starter policy. So, well, let's just see. I won't recruit. Let's just see what the available weapons are. Yeah, we've got 6 brigades worth of Springfield muskets already, rifle muskets. Got some Mississippi rifles. Those are pretty good weapons. They're slow firing, but they got a 500-yard range and very good accuracy. We get quite a few Springfield muskets. They're smooth bores. And as far as their firepower, they're not any better than the default mixed muskets. However, they do come with a bayonet, which means that even if their firepower is not any better, a unit armed with Springfield muskets is going to be better in melee than a unit with mixed muskets, which have just knives. Basically, I don't use melee very much, but it does happen sometimes, so it's better to have these than to have those. Got 3 brigades worth of Model 1817 rifles, which aren't very good, but at least they're rifles and they have a 400-yard range. So these are good to have until we get something better. And we've got 3 brigades worth of Hall rifles, which is a pretty interesting weapon. And it's very good and worth using throughout the campaign. Not, production Cs, they're considered obsolete, but they're breech loading, 8.5 rounds per minute. And so they're always going to be useful, and they will always be in the hands of somebody, however many I have. And then the 1 brigade worth of plains rifles, which are slow firing, but they have very good accuracy. They do have the 400-yard range, so somebody will use these. Probably one of those Missouri units. That seems to be the most appropriate place for plains rifles. And let's see if we have any sort of artillery available to us. Got some 12-pounders, which aren't very good, but they're better than the default 6-pounders. Do have a battery's worth of 10-pounder Parrott rifles. That's good to have. And then there's some howitzers, which aren't very good for range, but up close they're pretty good, especially canister range. I like using these in kind of direct infantry support, kind of the way that I organize corps, or in this case armies, is I'll probably have a separate division that'll have 3 or 4 batteries in it independently that all operate as a large group. But then I like to have 1 battery per infantry division, just so there's always some artillery closer to the troops along the line. And as they become available, I'll use the rifled artillery in the artillery division, but then I'll keep smoothbores with the infantry's own direct support artillery. And some of those will always have these 6-pounder field guns just from availability, but 12-pounder Napoleons are good for that, and I like to use the howitzers in that role as well. So I'm going to fiddle around with the organization, swapping around some commanders, try to make some sort of initial sense of the naval squadrons. I don't know if we need all 8 of these. There's a squadron at Savannah and a squadron at Charleston, which is just one ship. They're right next to each other. So I'll probably just combine those. But I'll do that. I'll do the chore of going through all the forts and fob off a lot of the crappy stat political appointee officers to these commands so that we get the benefit of improved state support from these political officers' states, but kind of squirreling them away in places where they're not going to have a huge effect with their 1-star or no star stats. There are some pretty good political officers. For example, John B. Gordon of Georgia would be one example, and there's some others too. I won't put them in forts. They'll find a spot here and there in the field armies. So fixing up the Navy, fixing up the armies, leaders, fort commanders, and I will put a cut in here and come back whenever we're ready to start advancing time and get the campaign rolling. Okay. I'm done with all that. So basically we had 8 independent forces, and I collapsed those down into 5. However, I did add a separate force, which I'll talk about in a second. So the main army here, I've also renamed them all from what the default start names were. So this is the Army of Northern Virginia. I shortened the names in the game just so they look a little bit short, just so they're a little bit shorter and look a little bit cleaner on the map and in other various displays. So, North Virginia Army. And I've got this organized into 3 infantry divisions and separate artillery divisions. Later, as this gets bigger, there'll be probably another battery in the artillery division, but also a battery per infantry division as well. Don't have enough to do that yet, and I'm not recruiting units until I get that Militia Act 2 complete, so we get 2-year recruits. Did I do that? Am I working on that? Yes, okay. So Longstreet was in command of a brigade, replaced him and bumped him up, so he's commanding the 1st Division here. William Walker and Barksdale. Barksdale is a political general, but he's kind of pretty good stats across the board. He's not a 1-star in anything, so I decided to use him. So that's this army. Over in the Shenandoah, 2 small divisions, one under Stonewall Jackson and one under Edmund Kirby Smith. Huger, the previous commander of the Hampton Division, artillery guy, so I decided to pop him over here, and he's commanding the Shenandoah artillery. And then the cavalry division here. By the way, the North Virginia Army did not start with any cavalry. They don't have any for now. They will. this cavalry brigade was Stuart's, that I bumped him up and made him the commander of a cavalry division, which is worth doing, even though there's only one brigade in it. First, on the tactical map during battle, units get a bonus, a morale bonus for having a higher level commander nearby, a divisional commander. So Stuart's presence helps out this brigade. In addition to that, the way that the order delays work in the hierarchy of the chain of command, a lot of times use cavalry for scouting well outside the command radius of the army, or later the corps commander. So having a divisional commander with the artillery helps out a lot with more timely maneuvers when cavalry are out farther away from the group. Because at a far distance, it would take a long time for orders to get directly from the army commander to the cavalry brigade. But if he has a divisional commander nearby, Stuart can still issue movement orders to his one brigade, Hawes, and the brigade will respond a lot quicker. Orders going from Johnston to Stuart will still take a long time. But I can have Stuart give orders to the brigade, and then I can just move Stuart around independently. Because I don't think that requires an order from Johnston. So Stuart's division, if I order him to move his division, which is just as one brigade under him, together, that order would come from Joe Johnston and take forever. But Stuart can order Hawes to go somewhere, and it'll be a lot quicker. And then Stuart can independently, I can just move him without having to wait for the order from Johnston. I don't know if that makes sense or not. That'll be a lot clearer. I should probably talk about that during a battle. That would probably make more sense. So if that didn't make sense, whenever it comes up in a battle at some point, it should be clear what I'm on about there. Out in Missouri, combined the Western Army and the Missouri State Guard into the Army of Missouri under Sterling Price. 2 little infantry divisions of Missouri and Arkansas troops. And these Missouri brigades were so small, I combined some of them so that each of these brigades is at least 1,000. They were, at game start, they were really kind of big regiments, 600 or 800 men. It's got a little bit of cavalry and artillery. Between those two forces, there were actually 2 cavalry brigades. I kept one here, and I moved the other one. It's going to take a while for it to get there, 12 days. But the Arkansas Cav, I sent that over to the Army of Tennessee, which is a combination of the Game Start Polk's Command and Army of Florida. So all these grayed out units in the other armies as well. These aren't newly recruited. These are simply units which are moving from some other location, which happens pretty fast in this game. Anyway, so we've got 2 divisions starting here in this Army of Tennessee, one under Gideon Pillow and one under Harvey Hill, D.H. Hill. And Richard Ewell actually is a cavalry officer by background. I don't think he did that during the war itself, but that was his training in the old U.S. Army. And he looked pretty decent, so I've put Ewell in command of the cavalry over here in Tennessee. And of course, the first thing I did was I replaced Leonidas Polk, and Albert Sidney Johnston is commanding the Army of Tennessee, as it should be. Hopefully he doesn't get shot in the first few months of the war, as happened in real life. And then finally took the Hampton Division, trucked it over the mountains to West Virginia. So this is the Army of the Northwest and the Hampton Legion, or Hampton Division rather, combined. Just one small infantry division and a couple of artillery batteries, or battalions I guess they are, but I will keep saying batteries, just out of habit I guess. This is still not a very big force, even combining those two. Only 3,000 men over here. I don't think this force is yet capable of going after the Federal Army, which is I think up here at Grafton. Union invasion, Army occupation strength. Yeah. There's a force here at Grafton, and then there's another smaller militia force up here at Wheeling. At some point, I hope to do something about that. But for now, the priority is to ensure that Union does not get Charleston. If they do that, then West Virginia could flip. So I think the thing to do with this little army is to try to get it down here and maybe put some forts down in this area. Kind of be an engineering army for now. Which brings me to the last unit, and I actually created this. This is just I made an engineering corps, and all it is just one brigade and a small one at that. This unit is not intended for combat at all. The only reason I created it is because I noticed that, you know, this red line along here, this is our telegraph connectivity, and there is no telegraph at all over here into Arkansas and Missouri. So this, basically the sole purpose of this unit as we get the campaign rolling is to plop down some telegraph stations. I think probably one in this area, so that there's a connection across. You know, the main trunk goes in this big loop from Virginia all the way down to Montgomery to New Orleans and then back up. So kind of want to create a connection kind of across this way, and to build a line which will go up to and support the Army of Missouri. Because right now on the campaign map he's so far away that all I did was I just ordered a stance, a scouting stance, and that order is taking almost 7 hours to get to him. And there's also a little bit of a morale recovery buff to being telegraph connected. So I want to get a telegraph line going up here, probably from Grenada. I don't think that'll reach quite all the way. An intermediate station at Helena, Little Rock. Hopefully that'll reach up to Fort Smith and then up to Carrollton. And once that's built, Sterling Price as needed, can build further telegraph stations as he heads up towards St. Louis. So this engineering corps, it's, like I said, no combat, and both of the officers in charge are engineers. Hopefully that makes this force construct things, supply depots and forts and that sort of thing, a little bit faster. I don't know if it does. Okay. I also went through, shuffled through all of the various forts. We've got like 30, almost 40 of them. Put political officers with bad stats, or in command of all of them, so to minimize their drawback. Guys I would never want to use in an army regardless. That said, the generic randomly generated volunteer officers that the game typically puts in command of forts by default, they're usually super horrible, like 0 stars in several categories. So even the bad political officers are still better than those fort commanders, so it's kind of a win-win all the way around. And then I kind of shuffled around with, let's look at the fleets here. Combined a couple fleets, so we've got 6 independent sea forces right now. It'll take a while for them to get readiness and finish building and repairing their ships. So they're just going to kind of sit in port for probably a couple months. But I did embark on a little bit of a shipbuilding program. We already had the CSS Virginia, a casemate ironclad building, but it won't be ready until next year, 263 days. And oh, by the way, right now, that is the only one we can have. I do not have the option to build an ironclad, a casemate ironclad. It's not available. I need to research an industrialization policy before that unlocks, I think. So we have that one ship that's kind of legacy there from game start. I went ahead and have started building 6 frigates. Which are fairly pricey, but I didn't go for the steam or the side wheel frigates, which are probably a little better. But I didn't go with those for 2 reasons. A, those burn coal. These do not. And second, the old sailing frigates are cheaper than those other ships, while still carrying a lot of firepower, 50 guns. Now these are probably older guns. If there's a way to look at the specific weaponry in the game, I don't know how to do that. It doesn't show up in any tooltips or ship stats. But there is a combat strength stat, which I think probably takes that into effect. And if I had 6 side wheel steamers or steam frigates, even though they have fewer guns, they would probably have higher combat strength because they have better, more modern guns. That said, frigates are pretty good. And my idea with these is to have one force, one naval force, that maybe can take on one Union blockade fleet and, actually go head to head with it and succeed. at least until they get ironclads. And maybe that can be helpful in keeping one port, one of our more important ports. I'm thinking probably New Orleans. Maybe keep that free of blockade more often than not. And then I also have started building a bunch of little third and fourth rate steamers, which are kind of cannon fodder. But the idea is these little squadrons will go out and conduct raid attacks on blockade fleets. And they won't win, and a lot of these ships will sink. But they degrade the readiness of the blockade fleets. And once they go low enough, they can't blockade anymore, because you have to be at least in yellow readiness. In this range. Once you go down in the orange and definitely the red, you can't blockade anymore. And that's the idea of the raid stance, naval stance. Is the idea is it's supposed to kind of pick away at the smaller ships of the enemy fleet. That's my understanding anyway. We'll see how that works out. Now, it's all self-defeating if, okay, maybe we can degrade the blockade that way a little bit. But those naval battles, which we know we're not going to win, they still count as losses. And so if it turns out that the morale, the national morale effect is too much, then I don't really know if that's worth doing. But anyway, that's what I'm doing with the Navy. So that's what I did off camera, and we're just about ready to get time rolling. I have already ordered the Shenandoah Army to zip over here by the North Virginia Army, because I suspect that right at the start, McDowell's army of I guess that's probably McDowell. This army here in Washington is probably going to immediately start moving on us. And I'm hoping that the Shenandoah Army can get within reinforcement range before that happens. One other thing worth mentioning that I did not recognize before, but because I did not take the Old Dominion starting policy, which is kind of the historical default, Virginia is a Confederate state, but Richmond is not the Confederate capital. The Confederate capital is down here at Montgomery, Alabama. So there's good and bad with that. The good is that it's way down here deep in the South. It would take quite a while for any Union army to get to it. So that's good. The bad part is, here's the capital. This is where the War Department is. Campaign map orders to armies emanate from here. So even with telegraph, it takes a while for orders to get up to Virginia. So it's going to be like 3 hours of game time before Johnston even gets the order from Montgomery to start moving. I did not think of that when I was choosing those policies. So maybe it's, maybe it's worth going with Old Dominion anyway, even though you get Virginia regardless in a summer 1861 or later start. because, capital or not, there's going to be a lot of fighting up in here, especially as one of our goals is to capture Washington. Anyway, we'll just see how that goes. And time is rolling. Civil wars. Further southern states secede. And here he comes. Yet McDowell is crossing the Potomac, and he's going to make a beeline straight for me, I think. And I do not want to initiate the battle during this episode, because I have learned in the past that once a battle is initiated, it is best to just go on through with no save and exit and coming back and so forth. So I'm going to put a cut in here, and in the next episode I am about 99% sure that we're going to have a battle right here around Manassas Junction. Thank you very much for watching.